Next, from Springfield, Mark DePue, the director of oral history at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum, sits down with former Governor Jim Thompson as the two recall the close 1982 gubernatorial election, in which Governor Thompson defeated his Democrat opponent Adlai Stevenson by just 5,000 votes. This runs about 1 hour.
What I wanted to change gears here and ask you about next, Governor, was your strategy about going after the labor vote, because that typically is Democrat turf.
Well, in Illinois you have Republicans and Democrats and independents, and while you know as a Republican candidate that most of your votes are going to come from the Republican side, sometimes that's not enough to win. And so you make every attempt to get the independent vote, get some of the Democratic vote. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One, you want all the votes you can get. Two, when you go obviously after Democrats or go after labor votes, what it says is that if you're elected governor, you're going to be fair to all of the people of Illinois, even though some of them may not have voted for you, or maybe an awful lot didn't vote for you. And that's very important, I think. People have to know that despite the challenges of a political campaign, when the election's over, you're going to be the governor of all the people. And Democrats and independents and others are entitled to the same treatment by you as a governor that members of your party would be. So it's a very strong two-reason interest to do it. Secondly, if you get Democratic votes, you're taking them away from your Democratic opponent. And you're adding to his weakness. And labor not only provides votes in the state of Illinois, unions, they're very influential in the campaigns. I mean, they marshal their forces, they get their members to the polls, and they contribute. Labor unions in Illinois spend large sums of money in a campaign. And there's no rule that says only the Democrats can get the money. So in my very first campaign, 76, I went after the labor vote. And the first labor leader to endorse me was a great guy, a Teamster official in Chicago, Louis Pike, head of Local 705 in Chicago. And he endorsed me, even though the popular perception was, well, here's a ex-prosecutor and a Republican at that. Why would a Teamster official who've had their problems with government or with prosecutors be endorsing him, you know? So that became an issue. And Louis said, hey, I'm endorsing him because I think he's the best candidate for governor. And he never asked me for anything. And as he came into the campaign, others started to come into the campaign because now they had cover, okay? So I got some labor support in the first campaign, some money, but I got an awful lot of votes because if you look at the voting in the 76 election, there were a hell of a lot of Democrats who voted for me. Republicans did, independents did, and a big chunk of the Democratic Party voted for me, which had to include union members, right? So in the second campaign, in 78, we got even more aggressive, got more endorsements. In the third campaign, 82, I thought it's going to be important to deprive Stevenson of traditional Democratic support, including labor. Adlai's relationships with unions were tenuous at best from what we heard. And more labor leaders were endorsing me.
To include the public sector unions?
To include the public sector unions and the teachers. In '82, I became within one vote in the state convention of the AFL-CIO of getting their endorsement, or what we called the COPE endorsement, the Committee on Political Education of the AFL-CIO, about the tightest Democratic group you could imagine. And I lost that endorsement by one vote. But you know what? I got all the money. And I got all the votes.
How did you get the money if you'd lost that vote?
Because the endorsement vote didn't mean that they couldn't contribute to you, the locals, or the independent, I mean, the independent state union, I mean, the carpenters or the plumbers or the building trades could support me financially and endorse me, even though their supergroup, the committee of the state AFL-CIO, didn't. And in '86, I got that endorsement. I was one of 2 Republican governors in the country to get the endorsement of the AFL-CIO. The other was Tom Kean of New Jersey. And it was, to me, a big deal just to say I had it, even though I already had the money and the votes and the endorsement of the constituent unions. It was like the good housekeeping seal, even though it didn't bring me anything additional.
You mentioned earlier that George Ryan was an opponent to ERA. He's now your lieutenant governor candidate.
Yeah.
He also was a proponent, as I understand, for the right to work, which is...
Well, he really wasn't a proponent of right to work. Everybody assumed he was, but he really wasn't. But he had been the Speaker of the House when the proposal came up. And George let the bill get out of committee and onto the House floor as a nod to his more conservative members. He was doing it for them, not doing it for the bill itself, because he knew it wouldn't pass. And I told him it wouldn't pass. And I said, if it passes, I'll veto it.
Did you say that in public as well?
Oh, yeah. I mean, on the day the bill was up, 15,000 union members, organized by the Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, came to Springfield, rallied in front of the Capitol. Huge crowd. And I went out to address them. And I said, we are not going to be a right-to-work state. If this bill passes, I'll veto it. And we are not doing anything in this state to deprive union members of their right to organize and support candidates and participate in the electoral life of Illinois. And you got to remember, before this time, I brought labor into my administration. I made business guys sit down with labor to solve problems. I'd bring people to the mansion, business groups and labor groups, and I'd say, we have to do something about workers' compensation in Illinois. We have to do something about unemployment compensation in Illinois. For years, no reform would pass unless it was an agreed bill. But I made them sit together. I took the union leaders on trade missions, along with business guys and Republican legislators. I remember when we were in Germany during a tour, trade mission, and it was Oktoberfest. And so as part of the trip, we visited a beer hall. And here was Pate Phillips, the Republican leader of the Senate, and Bob Healy, the head of the AFL-CIO, together in the beer hall drinking. Well, let me tell you, when they came back from a trip like that, it was far easier to get them to sit down and get things done. So I treated labor as an equal partner in my administration along with business. So when I went to labor unions and asked them for help, votes and money, it wasn't a cold call. It was a warm call, because we had been partners in government and partners in advancing the economy of Illinois. I wasn't a stranger. So I ended up, certainly by 82, certainly by 86, with the majority of the union vote, a great majority of the union money, and friendly relationships. And I thought that was really important.
Okay, another change in direction here for you. You've been in office for 6 years by the time you're running for re-election in 1982. Things happen, and there are some allegations about scandals or incidents that occurred. And I hope that this sounds familiar. Accepting gifts from potential donors, flights and cash. 30 to 40% discounts when you're purchasing antiques. And Governor, we know you like your antiques. Here was a curious one. You're taking campaign funds and using that to buy people gifts and to pay your babysitter dues and babysitter expenses.
Yeah. What's scandalous about that? If Jane and I, and she was an active participant in all of my campaigns, were going to a political function and we had to leave our daughter with a babysitter, why isn't that a legitimate campaign expense? But for the campaign event, we would have been at home and there would have been no babysitter. I mean, if that's the most they got, that's okay. I mean, that's just nutty stuff.
Was any of it in the neighborhood of violating specific laws?
No. And I kept an open book of every gift that I ever received as governor. Where do you think they got all that information? From the book. So if that's not transparency, if that didn't allow people to judge me, I don't know what would. And, you know, some Democratic politicians started that business about gifts to the governor. And, of course, the press liked it. They always like stuff like that. And so it was in the headlines for a while. And I can remember visiting a school down in southwestern Illinois. And I was visiting a grade school class. And at the end of the visit, kid comes up with a stool that they had built and decorated with my name on it, which I still have. And I said to the teacher, well, I don't know about that. I'm not supposed to accept gifts. This is crazy, you know. Here's a class of grade schoolers who had built this thing and looked forward to their meeting with the governor and decorated it. It's just a little wooden stool. You know, am I not supposed to accept that? What kind of state are we living in? You know, it's just goofy.
How about some of the things like accepting plane tickets? Because that does sound more like buying influence.
Well, the plane tickets were, first of all, in my first campaign when I didn't have the Illinois Air Force, right? It was very important in the campaign to be able to have friends who had planes let you use them to get around the state of Illinois. It's a huge state. You can't drive everywhere. You can't take a train everywhere. This is not the 1940s or the 1950s. And you're expected to be everywhere in the state of Illinois when you campaign, just like you're expected to be everywhere in the state of Illinois when you're governor. So plane trips were campaign donations, in-kind donations that were perfectly legitimate and reported on. No difference between that and cash, which most campaign contributions were. And the plane trips they were talking about were, okay, Illinois went to the Rose Bowl, one of the few times ever, right? And so, of course, a delegation of Illinois politicians flew out there with guys from the business community who had planes. And, of course, we got our head handed to us in the Rose Bowl. It was sort of embarrassing. Speaker Madigan and I were sitting together, and Samantha was sitting with us, and as the score got worse against Illinois, Samantha started covering her face like this. She kept saying, "Is it over yet? Is it over yet?" And I was talking to Mike and said, you know, she's got a point. Is it over yet? Oh, boy. But that's the kind of thing you're talking about. Every governor does that. Jim Edgar would fly off to the Kentucky Derby with people who had planes. You know, if you can be corrupted or influenced by a plane ride, you got no business being in government. I mean, it's stupid. It's silly. It doesn't happen that you would be influenced by something like that.
You mentioned Jane. Was she helping on the campaign trail this time around?
Oh, yeah.
And
She had
Samantha with you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Jane had been active in my campaigns from the beginning, from 1976 on. In fact, in 76, Jane cut a commercial aimed at the Hispanic voters of Chicago. And she did the commercial in Spanish, which she's fluent in. And it was one of the hit commercials of the campaign. Governor's or candidate's wife speaking out for him to the Hispanic community in Spanish. And it's been copied since that time. But she's always been active in all of my campaigns. She's a fine campaigner. People like her. And Samantha, who I think went to her first political event when she was just like weeks old, turned out to be an extraordinary campaigner. I mean, who can resist the appeal of a little kid saying, "Vote for my daddy," you know? And so Samantha loved to take a roll of stickers and walk the sides of the street in the campaigns and peel off a sticker and put it on people. Didn't even have to ask for them. She had their stickers and she had them on them and kept going. Or Skilbeck would sometimes give her the bullhorn, because Skilbeck in a parade would precede me, you know, and announce, the governor of the state of Illinois, let's have a big Carbondale welcome to the governor of the state of Illinois, Jim Thompson. Well, sometimes he would let Samantha do that. And she'd see this little voice saying, let's have a big Rockford welcome to my dad, the governor of the state of Illinois. Here he comes. And people adored her. You know, she was a hit.
Well, since we're talking about Samantha, let me read, this is a little bit on the lengthy side, Mike Royko column on April 1st. April Fool's Day. And he's talking about Samantha. If Governor Thompson is serious about his political career, he should probably put his little daughter, Samantha, up for adoption. Many people accuse Thompson of showing off the child in order to try to win the sizable baby lover vote.
There's a baby lover vote?
And the
Didn't realize
criticism
that.
reached its crest
I missed my calling.
when Chicago Tribune printed an editorial sternly reprimanded Thompson's for taking the baby to the governor's inaugural ceremony, which was held outdoors. Last Sunday, the Tribune did a front-page expose on how the Thompsons used campaign money for gifts, babysitters. I'm telling you, that Samantha is nothing but trouble. And if they don't get rid of her, she'll cause even more trouble. Why, she's already becoming a campaign issue. And here's how he concludes this column. Stevenson immediately grabbed a chance to say that the babysitting spending should be investigated. That's easy for Adlai to say. He never used his campaign fund for babysitters. That's because Adlai's family isn't at all afraid to leave him home alone. I don't know if you want to respond to that or not, Governor.
Look, Royko was a dear friend of mine and always supportive. You know, when I was attacked by somebody, and but he was a gifted comedy writer when he wanted to be. And what he's saying is, it shows you how silly some of these issues are. Can you imagine? Look, here's a family of 4 in the state of Illinois, and they have things on their mind. They want to make sure the breadwinner of the family, whether it's the husband or the wife, keeps and does a good job, supports the family economically. They want to make sure their kids are taken care of, and they're saving for college, and they want to make sure they have good relations with their family and their neighbors. They want a nice house. This is what's on their minds. Do you think they are at all interested in the issue of whether the governor used campaign funds to pay for a babysitter so that he and his wife could go to a political event? I mean, you know, when you don't have any other issues and you're jumping on stuff like that, it's the wrong thing to do. Politically, it's the wrong thing to do.
Okay, now we're going to get into the heat of the campaign and start talking about the debates. And first thing that has to be decided is some kind of negotiating between the two teams about how many debates and where they're going to be.
Yeah.
What was the thought about having debates with Stevenson? Would that be a plus or a minus when you were beginning the negotiating process?
You know, I like debates. I looked forward to the debates. Gave me a chance personally to say who I was and what I was for, what I had done, what I wanted to do. And yeah, it came with questions, and yeah, it came with responses by your opponent, and it gave him a chance to attack you face to face. But all that aside, I like debates, and I never was afraid to appear in debates.
Isn't that essentially what a prosecuting attorney does?
I mean, that's an argument to a jury. That's what debates are. So there was never any hesitation on my part to agree to debates, any place, any time.
The campaign ended up having 4 debates. The first was in Peoria on September 1st, and the press basically thought that Stevenson came out on top of that particular debate, but you came out swinging pretty hard afterwards, making allegations, claiming that Stevenson had lied in that debate, that you had 5 pages of facts to refute the 4 times the specific lies that the Stevenson campaign had made in that particular debate. You recall any of that?
Yeah, I recall that. I don't recall what the lies were, but
well, I can help you a little bit if you don't mind.
Sure.
The unemployment rate for Illinois rose faster in the last 5 years than all other states. That was one of the things you challenged. The state government debt has been rising twice as fast as the federal government debt. That 21,000 businesses had failed in the last year. And you had U.S. District Court records that said 2,600, not 21,000. So those are the kind of things that now the campaign is heating up a little bit. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Well, look, if your opponent says something that you believe is not true, you answer it. You don't take that. You answer it. And we answered it with what we thought were facts. We put them on paper. We handed them out to the press. But you know what? As important as economic issues were in that campaign, and they were vital, people want to know what you're trying to do about it within the limits of the power of the governor's office. People know that you're not responsible for rising unemployment rates when rising unemployment rates are happening all over the country. They're smarter than that. They want to know what you're trying to do about it in Illinois. So, yeah, nobody likes to hear untrue facts uttered in a debate, and sure, you answer them, but they're not the life or death of a campaign. What you're doing is the life or death of the campaign.
Well, this is about the time that one of these incidents occurs that kind of takes a life of its own, and it's something I know you remember. It was this whole discussion about whether or not Adlai was a wimp.
That was one of the high points of the campaign, as it turned out. It was great. Just great.
How did it happen in the first place?
I'll tell you how it happened. We were both marching in a parade in Chicago. It might have been the Labor Day parade. I'm not sure. It was one of them. Labor Day was probably it. I don't know. You could check the timing of this thing. But so we're marching in the parade. Not together, of course. He's at a different point of the parade than I am. But I'm watching him. And he had come to this parade in a raincoat and a hat, and he was carrying a briefcase. I thought, that's sort of strange. And he was walking along the side of the curb. He was not really participating in the parade, the mass of the parade. And he was not waving to the voters or talking to voters. Basil Talbot, who was a Chicago Sun-Times reporter, was walking next to him. And Basil was conducting an interview as Adlai marched down the street, completely ignoring the rest of the parade and completely ignoring all the spectators who were gathered on the curb. And I thought, that's the most remarkable thing I've ever seen in a parade. And then he got to the end of the parade and he disappeared. Well, it wasn't until the next day when Basil printed his story that we found out some of the things they were talking about. I mean, first of all, the notion that you would conduct an interview while you're marching in a parade is just crazy. Reporters can wait. I mean, you're there for the people. And you're there to participate with everybody else in the parade. So he was complaining about me, complaining about the campaign, and says to Basil, and I forget what the issue was, but he said, Thompson is trying to make me appear as some sort of a wimp. And he was all agitated. And you can see in some of the interviews he's done for this oral history that he was just beside himself, that nobody was paying attention to the fact that he had been a tank commander, by God. And when all this controversy arose, he wanted to run a commercial talking about that, and his campaign manager wouldn't let him. Well, that's strange. First of all, you're the candidate. You can tell the campaign manager what he's going to do or not do. Because Adlai always claimed to be in charge of his own campaigns. By God, he wouldn't ask for campaign contributions because that would make him bought and sold. So the notion that his campaign manager wouldn't even let him respond to this is sort of crazy. But in any event, so Basil prints his story. And of course, the press, loves this stuff, right? Oh, so I'm doing a drug bill signing that morning at a school on the west side of Chicago. And we had seen the story before we got to the scene of the school. And I'm talking to Skilbeck and I'm talking to Gilbert, and we know I'm going to get asked about this, right? Because the allegation by Stevenson was I was trying to make him appear some sort of wimp. Now, the word wimp had never, ever left my mouth. I never called him a wimp. I never implied he was a wimp. Nothing. But we knew the press would ask. And so we determined that no matter what they asked, I was not going to call him a wimp. He had called himself a wimp. And if I kept my mouth shut, the story would keep going. If I, got into it and said, well, he is, or whatever, it would end, right? So no matter what they asked me, I wasn't going to rise to the bait. course, the questions they asked me had me responding by saying, I didn't call him a wimp. I don't think he's a wimp. I must have used the word wimp 14 times answering their questions, but not as an accusation on my part. And as I predicted, the story kept going, and then there were the cartoons.
And we see a cartoon right here. Adlai III, go for it. And here he is, dressed up with his boxing gloves, and he's about ready to go up to the big gym.
Yeah, well, that was probably the kindest of the cartoons out of all of them that were shown. And of course, the press had a field day with this wimp thing. And of course, it didn't help Adlai.
What I'd like to do now, Governor,
it was like the one time where he made the remark that they were, asking him about his campaign day and said what he did. And he said, well, there were no good places in the Loop in Chicago to eat. That's why he went to, what the hell was it, the Arts Club or something like that, some exclusive club, because there were no places in downtown to eat. And we looked at that and said, oh, this is too good to pass up. And so whenever we would eat downtown, we'd leave a place at the table for Adlai and put a little sign on the table that said Adlai. And of course, there was the empty chair.
I would like to play an excerpt out of the interview I had with Senator Stevenson.
Oh, I'm sure.
And this is what I think you were referring to, talking about a wimp or a tough guy. And we just get to listen to this one.
So ironic. He was a tough man for tough times.
You say that ironically. That was his slogan, right?
That was his. And I'll never forgive one of my campaign consultants and managers because I was being portrayed as a wimp, and he was a tough man for tough times. And I insisted that this guy use some of our limited television to portray me for what I was. A Marine Corps veteran of Korea who had, volunteered for combat in Korea and served there as a tank platoon commander. And he never ran that. Thompson even cut into veterans organizations. He pleaded 4F. Asthma. That never came across. To this day, I've asked other consultants, why, running against a draft dodger, did my consultant refuse to depict me in my tank? I still don't know the answer.
Well, first of all, you remember what happened to Dukakis in his tank. Secondly, the notion that a candidate for governor couldn't persuade his campaign manager to answer the wimp thing with a tank ad is just bizarre. And if that was Adlai's nature, he wasn't the candidate for governor of Illinois, let me tell you, because many more tough problems than that face a governor than persuading your own campaign manager to answer what he thought was an attack. And I didn't plead 4F. The Army doctors determined I was 4F. And he never said during the campaign that I was a draft dodger. He's waited 32 years to say that. And he said it in your interviews 4 times. But he didn't say it in 82, and he didn't say it in 86. So I think that gives you some kind of indication of what kind of guy he is.
Well, that leads us right into the second debate. And what I wanted to do here is show 2 excerpts out of the beginning of the 2 opening statements that you have, and let you first respond to Stevenson's, and then we can take a look at your opening statement. So here's Senator Stevenson's opening statement in the second debate.
The state of Illinois has some very curious priorities. Why must the state of Illinois maintain one of the largest air forces in the world? 18 airplanes just for the transportation of politicians. The airspace over Illinois is filled with flying politicians. Why must the governor have a $2 million helicopter? This is where we are number 1 in Illinois. There is no state, I mean literally no state, that spends so much money on the perquisites of its politicians, led above all others by the governor, then Illinois, and then shortchanges such criticalities, such really high priorities as education and also research. Research which ultimately produces some 80% of all the new growth and all of the new jobs, all of the wealth in this country. Research which increasingly is being conducted in Japan and in other countries which understand those priorities better than does the Thompson administration.
Okay, that clip is actually from the third debate that you had, but we're going to go ahead and play your response to that as well, if we can find that next as well. And the quality of the...
Stevenson, the point I was trying to make was that but for this administration, there wouldn't even be the $35 million in agricultural research and veterinary medicine in the Food for Century 3 program that we began. The other point I was trying to make was that even agricultural research, as important as it is, can't have every single dollar that it wants. A good governor, tough governor, especially a governor who's trying to get his state through hard times and not just make promises to win election, has to know when to say no. And governors and other political office holders in this state have been using state aircraft to get around the state and visit the people for a long, long time. Your father did when he was governor. Nobody criticized him. He used to ride in the cockpit of the plane. It's important, Mr. Stevenson, that governors come to southern Illinois and Rockford and Decatur and Peoria, as well as Chicago and Springfield. Your Senate President, Mr. Rock, offered the amendment that bought the helicopter, and I don't think he's sorry.
Anything to add from the comments you made there in terms of the response?
Well, it was a silly thing to say on Stevenson's part. First of all, because, you know, it's the kind of thing that he would say to titillate the press. I don't think on the mind of the voters of Illinois was the issue of, do we have too many airplanes? Is the governor flying around too much? Is the fact that we have state airplanes taking away from vital areas of the budget? The cost of the airplanes and the helicopter were minuscule when compared to the costs of education or the costs of Medicaid or the costs of research and development. You couldn't even find it in the budget. And we are, as I said, a big, big state. I mean, we go from the northern state line and up near Rockford down to Cairo, Illinois, which is closer to Mississippi than it is to Chicago. We're a big, wide state. People expect to see the governor. People expect to be able to talk to the governor in their hometowns. And the notion that you would be confined to driving around in a car in a state the size of Illinois and be able to do 4 or 5 or 6 events a day is ludicrous. Those were the 80s, not the 40s. And as I said, his father flew around in the state planes up in the cockpit with the pilots. Didn't hear Adlai complain about that as his father was doing it. No, he had to wait to a gubernatorial campaign. The whole thing is silly. First of all, the state had a number of small helicopters, Jet Bell Rangers. They were medical helicopters. They airlifted patients from scenes of accidents and shootings and other things where life was at stake to bring them to the hospital. Once in a while I would use those when they were not being used for medical purposes. But the instruction to the pilot was, if you get a call to go to the scene of an accident or to pick up a medical patient, take him to the hospital, you put the governor down wherever you are. It might be the middle of a cornfield. You put him down because the patient comes first. I was a secondary user of the aircrafts. I can recall a time when I thought we were able to persuade a Wisconsin factory to move across the state line to Illinois. So I hopped in the helicopter and flew up there, landed on the grounds of the Wisconsin factory, went in to see the CEO, made my pitch. governor of Wisconsin, Tommy Thompson, was so upset by that, he went to his legislature and asked for a helicopter, and they gave it to him. I mean, people don't care about that stuff. Press might think they care about that stuff, so they'll run the story for a day or two, and opposition politicians like Stevenson might think that this is a good way to get the governor. I answered it, people don't care about that.
What I'm hoping we can find next is a couple excerpts, video excerpts we have from the second debate. And this is one where setting up, this is the introduction for Stevenson and talking about his priorities.
Thank you, Mrs. Schiller. Governor Thompson and friends. Well, you are friends. With documented reasons, I have expressed my belief that Illinois' economy has declined in 5 years faster than in any other state. It is pointless to quarrel. We all agree that Illinois is in serious trouble. Our disagreement is over where we go from here. More baling wire, more deals, more politics as usual won't do. It pains me then to have my 5th campaign debased. It pains me more to envision a future for Illinois blighted by its politics. Illinois is going through a second industrial revolution. That is the central fact we must face. The McCormick Reaper and the John Deere plow revolutionized agriculture and helped Illinois establish its industrial base. Illinois won the first industrial revolution. But where are the builders and the doers from our past, the McCormick Reapers of our future? We are losing PhDs in commerce and engineering. We are losing our capital. We are losing jobs in the industries from our past, and we are not gaining jobs in the industries of the future. Our share of employment in high technology is shrinking faster than in all of the other states. We are losing to states that are on the move. Illinois already has more than 400,000 workers displaced by technology or the decline of mature industries. For them, it is endless welfare. Already 1 out of 10 people in Illinois are on welfare. These are not statistics. These are living, breathing human beings. They laugh, they cry. Sooner or later, some turn up as crime statistics.
Obviously, it continues for a couple more minutes there, Governor. We're going to show your opening statement as well, but maybe if I can get your thoughts about just the optics of this particular presentation by Stevenson.
Hey, what he said was largely true. And it was something that I had been acknowledging all during my campaign. I wasn't disputing that. Yeah, at one time we were leaders in the invention of farm implements, the reaper, the plow. Illinois was known for that. But we're still doing that. I wonder if he had ever heard of John Deere or Caterpillar, who were making the modern versions of the machinery that he was talking about from the McCormicks. It's a failure on his part to recognize that Illinois had changed. Every state had changed. We were in service industries, which were starting to replace the manufacturing activities and the agricultural activities of the prior century. And we're still doing that in Illinois, as they were in every other state. So to say, well, we've lost the McCormicks and we've lost this and we've lost that without acknowledging what we had gained during a century is useless, I think. It shows a lack of acquaintance with your own state. You go out into farm today and you see a combine good God, it looks like a vehicle of the future. It's got a huge cab, it's got air conditioning, it's got radio or television, it's got everything, and it can combine more product than the combines of 100 years ago. And they're being made in the state of Illinois by the same kind of people that made them a century before. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand the state you're trying to be governor of. I mean, it's just, I didn't recognize that as an acquaintance with his own state.
Okay, well, let's see how you responded back in 1982 to that.
My fellow Illinoisans, in Peoria, we thought we would debate the issues. My wife told me I had thrown in everything except the kitchen sink. I left the kitchen sink at home today, Mr. Stevenson, and I'm pleased that you did too. What is the job of being governor all about? I think that is the central issue of this campaign, and how well each of us are fitted for that job by training, by experience, by temperament, by compassion, by views and philosophies. Much has been made in this campaign of strategies. Much has been made of position papers. Positions have been taken, though details somehow are lacking. Details that were promised early in the campaign were always put off till next week, next month, this summer, this fall. We still don't have much. I think strategies are important. I think one ought to know what his position is on issues and not waver back and forth, not change upstate and downstate. But to me, the job of being governor of the state of Illinois, the fifth largest state in the nation, the state that mirrors the nation more than any other, whose people mirror the people of the nation more than any other, has an other dimension, and that is about people.
Okay, obviously just part of your opening statement. Your thoughts about, well, let me just say this, and this is my impression, but you looked more comfortable in front of the camera than Senator Stevenson did.
His, I don't say this as a personal criticism, but as a political observation. He, either by training or experience or other life factors, or the jobs that he had held previously in governmental service, I don't think was particularly comfortable in debates or speeches or interviews. We came from different backgrounds, you know. I was a lawyer and a prosecutor. I was used to getting it in and mixing it up. You know, I was used to speaking to a jury, which is a lot like a debate. And he just didn't seem comfortable to me during the course of the campaign, and I think it showed. He looked aloof. He looked as though he were not really engaged in the guts of what the campaign is supposed to be. Now, that may be true or not true. That's just my impression. But I think you saw in the two different contrasting presentations there, it was not only what was said, but how it was said and how you looked.
Well, you've mentioned yourself that he had a different kind of a campaign style, a different approach to that process. What I'd like to do next is to play another audio clip from our interview, and obviously, Governor, you've already listened to the interview that I had with Senator Stevenson. This one is about winning was all that counts.
what the newspapers were picking up was that these are two people who just don't like each other.
Well, it's certainly, true in my case. I had no respect for him. But I'm a little surprised that I would have been that explicit. He was kind of the antithesis of everything I and my family stood for, and presided over the conversion of Illinois from our politics to his.
How were the two families different?
It was just anything. Winning is all that counts. Governing was what counted in our family. It was, patronage and tactics. He didn't even serve when his time came.
Mentioned you'd heard that before. Governor, we got just a couple minutes, but I'll let you to respond to his comments.
Well, you can't govern if you don't win. I mean, that's pretty obvious. If you're not first interested in winning so that you're able to govern by taking the political office, like governor, you might as well be a political science professor. I mean, come on. Winning is all that counts. Well, that's exactly right. That's the end result of a campaign, and then you go on to govern. So that doesn't make any sense to me. And he's always repeating the issue of his family. Now, I know he takes a great deal of pride in his family, his grandfather and his father, and they were able men. I was so enamored of his father, I used to carry a picture of his father and me in my wallet. When I was 18 years old and a student at Washington University in St. Louis, his father, in the middle of a campaign, was coming to an area close to there. And I came across the river, and I attended that event, and I asked his father for a picture, and we got it taken. And that was a proud possession of mine as a kid. I thought his father was a great man. But he kept talking about his family during the campaign and what they stood for, which was the complete antithesis of what you stand for, Thompson, as though they were royalty. I mean, and royalty doesn't go very far with the electorate of Illinois. It was just a strange way to conduct himself, or a strange way to speak, as though I'm good and you're evil. And that's the campaign. I mean, it's just, people didn't believe that.
Now, you heard him say that he didn't like you. Now,
yeah.
Maybe that's a bit strong, but how would you feel about him during the midst of the campaign?
Same way. I'm not going to hide it. I didn't like him.
And how about respect? He said he didn't respect you.
Well, I mean, I think that says more about him than it does about me.
Well, Governor, all we have left to talk about in the campaign is the end of the campaign, the election results, and the next 2 months trying to figure out who actually won the election. So that'll be our next
session. That was
session.
exciting.
Thank you very much.